I really did not want it to come to this. I really didn't. I enjoyed the last few episodes that I covered in the previous video, but I don't know how to feel about the ending of the show. On one hand, the last stretch of the show is thematically relevant, but on the other, it's also incredibly overt and clumsy about what it's trying to say. It's hard to take scenes reinforcing this theme of love and forgiveness seriously when the characters are screaming at the top of their lungs about how love will save the world, or when Yo hugs a guy that he doesn't have any connection to and thanks him for pretty much nothing. The soundtrack helps a little in this regard. I've said before that I like, maybe even love, the OST of 2021, and that's still true. The triumphant tone of the music in these scenes is infectious and makes even the dumbest thing feel slightly inspiring. However, that doesn't fix the underlying problem. Even when I get carried away by the music, what the characters are saying always manages to bring me back down to earth. Actually, that's a huge part of the reason why this final arc doesn't work for me. There's nothing in this stretch of the show that lets you take the events that happen seriously. Every emotional beat that happens within the stretch of episodes is either done off-screen or handled so poorly that it might as well have been off-screen too. With one exception, but I'll talk about that later. For now though, let's start where I left off, episode 45. I'm really glad that the fight between Yo and Team Ren was interrupted. I really don't care for the action in the show. Why waste time having your characters fight for something when you can accomplish the same thing in less time and move the story in a genuinely more interesting direction. I like what they do after the match too. While taking a break in the bath, Hao shows up out of nowhere and just hangs out with them for a while. The exchanges that the main characters and Hao have are really fun too. They do a pretty good job of humanizing the guy, which is good because of how the show ends. Also, this line is pretty good foreshadowing for Horohoro's past. Also, I was really excited when they brought back the whole humans versus shaman plot point back from episode 43, but that's where the positive things end for a good while. See, you'd think that a potential arc where humans and shamans wage war against each other would be a huge deal and something that would require a lot of time to deal with. This is further supported by the fact that Hao makes such a big deal out of it, saying that Yo will have to take responsibility for fueling the fire by bringing his human friend to the shaman fight, even though that's against the rules, which is a surprise considering that was never established before in the show. So not only does it seem like the writer just came up with that now to add more drama to the situation, but it also doesn't lead to anything too great either. Instead of actually making Yo deal with the fact that he broke the rules and potentially made it impossible for humans and shamans to coexist with each other, this seemingly major event is relegated to just another opportunity for Hao to show off how overpowered he is. What's that? This is actually meant to do something else within the narrative of the show? Oh, it's another training arc. Yay! Except this training arc is half an episode long, fails to show any significant progress in the main characters, doesn't even involve the main character's training really, and even presents Hao's very sinister and sadistic way of killing people as something to be admired. While we're watching Hao go absolutely wild here, Ren talks about Hao's lack of hesitation and qualms in regard to killing. This wouldn't be a huge red flag on its own, but combined with the previous episode where Yo basically tells Ren that in order to be strong of heart you have to have the resolve to kill without hesitating. Yeah, but I guess I can let this slide since what Hao is doing here isn't killing them. Like, he is killing them, but he's gonna bring them back afterwards. But still, very weird that they decided to do that. There are also a multitude of other problems with this arc's worth of content crammed into one episode. Starting with what I just said, as quickly as this problem was introduced, it gets resolved. What's the point of introducing a problem of this scale, of this magnitude, and just getting it over within the span of half an episode? You could probably argue that it was meant for the character development of Yo, but the only development that I can see Yo going through in this sequence of events has to do with the previously mentioned fueling of the fire by bringing Manta with him to the shaman fight. However, this potentially amazing piece of development has the unfortunate setback that there are no consequences for his actions. The shaman fight won't be delayed or affected in any way since the second round will be taking place at the bottom of the ocean, which begs the question, why is this war even happening? And any moral issue that Yo would have to deal with about killing people is easily avoided by the fact that no one can die anymore. Hao is gonna bring everyone back at the end and nothing will have changed. But wait, there's one one more incredibly important plot point that I forgot to mention. Manta's father was the one leading the army that was attacking the island, so part of the aftermath revolves around Manta having a heart-to-heart with his emotionally distant father, and the two finally seeing eye to eye after years of him living a stifling and controlled life under this dude with silver hair. That sounds really important, right? How could I possibly forget to mention that? Well, A, Manta isn't exactly the most important character, at least in this version of the story, but B, the anime also forgot that they were supposed to do that scene. After his dad says, "I want to speak with my son alone," we cut away, and the next time we see Manta, he runs into frame and says, "I finally convinced my dad to let me stay." So that scene, which was set up all the way back in episode 8, the only thing other than those other reasons that I listed which could have in some way justified this very pointless thing, is done off screen. But then you might say that's not all this was for. We were introduced to new characters as well, and you're right, from this part of the story we got fan favorite characters such as another previous member of the X-Laws whose name I forget, but he's built up as this ultra powerful guy who even Lucas and Marco fear, and he's taken out immediately, doesn't leave a lasting impact on the plot, and is never relevant again past the point he was introduced, so he really did not need to be here. But we also got a female whose name I do remember but don't wish to say for private reasons. We're actually given less information about her outside of what her super duper power does and her goal of finding a boyfriend, which I guess is all the characterization the show thought we needed for her. And her only purpose is to hook up with the guy who doesn't need to be here, and I get the feeling that I'm supposed to feel happy for them, but this is really bad. Okay, I'm done. I shouldn't have spent so much time talking about this, but there were just so many things that bothered me about this half episode. Anyways, moving on to the final arc, which I'm surprised is actually pretty similar to the final arc of the original show. It's basically a gauntlet of enemies that the main characters need to take on in order to get to Hao. The main difference between the two arcs though is that in the original, Yo is separated from the rest of his friends, whereas in the new one, they move as a group to get to Hao. So the first fight takes place between Marco and Lucas. Since they want to conserve mana as much as possible, only Marco will be fighting. This fight is where a lot of problems in the cycle of hatred theme will become apparent to people. It's pretty obvious that the main message of Shaman King 2021 is that you have to love and forgive people in order to break the cycle of hatred, but the reinforcement of this theme is done in such an over-the-top way that, as I stated in the beginning of the video, makes it hard to take this seriously. In this fight, as an example, the way they get that message across is by having Marco scream about the importance of love as he dies, and this is meant to be a very momentous scene. But choosing a character who at this point in the story is nothing but comic relief now, as the focus of the scene, is not the best choice. You can definitely argue that it makes the most sense for Marco out of all of the characters to say this kind of thing, but that just goes to show how ridiculous putting this theme into words really is. The solution? Don't put it into words. Show it through the characters' actions. Good examples of this would be Yo being really nice to the demon who manipulated Anna, Marco forgiving and coming to an understanding with Lucas, the man he felt betrayed by, and if this scene was actually a thing, Manta's father realizing he'd been incredibly shitty to his son, and Manta forgiving him for that. All of these are ways to non-verbally convey this message to the audience. Same result, but less tone-breaking and more subtle. The original show ultimately speaks to this theme of acceptance a lot more effectively than the new one does. The way they do this is by making Hao the indisputable bad guy. First off, the audience understands Hao's goal earlier, which is to wipe out all humans and create a utopia for shamans. Secondly, instead of focusing on Hao's human traits, they focus on his cool and calculated demeanor. Whenever he's present, he has an intimidating aura. He never has moments like the bathhouse scene from the new Shaman King. The closest thing to that is the scene where Anna slaps him. Finally, one of the best things that the original anime did was give Manta a much larger role and more interactions with Hao. As Yo's only human friend, this is essential. Both Hao's interest in Manta for being friends with Yo and his dismissal of him as just another human who won't be able to stand with Yo is perfect for associating him with the one who can't accept people, not the one who can't be accepted. He's the one perpetuating this cycle of hatred more so than the people who rejected him in the first place. So in the original, having the villain representing hatred fight the hero representing acceptance as someone who has already accepted humans, Manta being the proof, and having the hero coming out on top is a good way to show that theme. In comparison, the new version emphasizes his sympathetic nature more than anything. There are tons of scenes where the main point is to humanize his character and tell the audience that he's actually a kind-hearted person. That's not to say the new version of Hao is bad. He is definitely the strongest part of the new Shaman King. His character makes a powerful statement that even though he's done awful things, he's actually the victim and deserves to be forgiven. Even if you don't agree with the happy ending that he got, this is still in line with the show's themes. I just wish that they had cut out all of the dumb speeches about Point is, I think the original Shaman King handled this theme better and in a way that didn't lessen the impact of that theme. Then we move on to the actual fights. In the new Shaman King, the main characters have to fight all 10 Pacificians separated into plants, and my god, are these fights boring as dirt. One of the things that makes it so boring is the fact that no one can die. Now, let's address the number one counterpoint that will probably come up before I say anything else. Yes, the characters say that they can't abuse their healing powers too much because they have to conserve mana, and once they run out of mana, they can't revive anybody anymore. This doesn't matter because in the first plant, Ryu dies and they find a reason to heal him. That shows to the audience that the writers are not willing to sacrifice any of the main characters. Then, in the fourth fight between Faust and that announcer guy, they find a way to bullshit him reviving mid-fight multiple times. Then, when he finally actually dies, he's not allowed to actually die since he's still here just as a spirit, and because of that, they find a way to revive people without expending too much mana. So even when there are restrictions to the ability to revive people, the show goes out of its way to make things less tense. Out of all of these fights, there are only 3 that carry any sort of meaningful emotional resonance for the audience. Those fights revolve around Horohoro, Ren, and Yo, so let's talk about them. I really don't like Horohoro's flashback about his past. Hao's allusion to the girl that he liked was the best part of this for me since the flashback is hopelessly rushed. We don't see any kind of interaction between Horohoro and the girl that he apparently holds so dear. It fails to make me feel anything resembling sadness or empathy for the character that I'm supposed to because there's nothing to get attached to. But what makes this flashback unforgivable for me is the use of the really stupid trope of having a character say that they killed someone, but making it so that they didn't actually kill them. There's just no commitment in this trope. This trope is supposed to make the character deal with an irredeemable mistake that they made, but not actually following through on that part is missing the whole point. It bothers me so much here because having Horohoro actually physically kill her would have been a better way to explore the theme of the show, because when she reveals that she was actually his spirit all along, she could have the chance to forgive him because she loves him. Doing that, this whole thing would actually have a point other than giving one of the main characters an obligatory sad backstory. I actually really like Ren's fight against Necron. There was actual dramatic tension previously established, and the show follows through on that to a satisfying degree. Seeing Ren play the villain here and Necron's change of heart was surprisingly moving and effective. Not to mention, this fight didn't feel like it was wasting time like the other ones. Finally, Yo versus Silva. Awful. For something that was probably the most anticipated fight of this arc outside of the final confrontation with Hao, it goes by lightning quick. Also, when we saw Silva previously, he was being brainwashed, but now he's not. I feel like they should have shown him going back to normal. That seems like a really important scene. There's not much else to say about this fight because nothing happens in it. I say that this fight was the most anticipated, but that was kind of by default. It's not like Yo actually had a strong relationship with Silva, and neither does the audience in all honesty, so this fight also fails in terms of how dramatically effective it is. None of the other fights are really noteworthy. The reason why I don't feel the final arc of the original Shaman King is boring, even though the structure is kind of similar, is because there's so much more going on emotionally. Mantis talks with Hao, Yo's interactions with Silva after finding out that he's also related to Hao, Lazard coming back to help, not to mention that it feels urgent and people can actually die. The main characters defeat the final patch official, but it's too late and Hao has already awakened from his slumber and is now all-powerful. I like the way that they portray him after he's integrated with the Great Spirits. The way he steals the souls of people around him is incredibly intimidating, and you really get the sense that he's this insurmountable obstacle. He snatches up the souls of of all the main characters, and they wind up inside the Shaman King's commune, or Hao's commune now. Something that doesn't sit right with me is that Yo says that he doesn't really like humans. There's one scene that hints towards this, which is in Yo's fight against Voss, where Anna reveals that Yo was ostracized as a kid, but saying that he doesn't like humans still seems out of character. It's also something that's not established that well in the show, since the only time the show alludes to this, Anna's comment, is mostly about how much Manta means to Yo rather than how terribly he was treated in the past. It doesn't matter too much though, since Yo still doesn't agree with what Hao is doing, and at the end of the day it's just a brief comment. It turns out that all of the warriors Sati scouted before are able to appear in the space, and the main characters make one last stand against Hao, attempting to make him an acceptable king. Again, this fight isn't all that special. It's the moment after this that really works though. I love how every character from minor to major comes back in this final episode to give Hao an emotional send-off. I'm a sucker for these kinds of things. You get the sense that everything's come full circle, and this kind of payoff justifies the huge cast of the show in ways that individual characters couldn't. You can see that this also happens in the final episode of the original anime. Every character we've seen up until that point bands together to power up Yo while fighting Hao. The main difference in these endings is what actually happens to Hao though. The original show refuses to give Hao a happy ending. He loses all composure and dignity in his last moments, he's abandoned by the last friend he had, and he ultimately dies without any of his goals being achieved or his humanity being restored. And this ending fits this version of the character. He doesn't deserve a happy ending. He needs to be held accountable for his actions. The polar opposite happens in the new version of the show, which again fits the more sympathetic and humanized version of Hao that we got in that show. He loses his ability to read minds, which means that he doesn't feel that crushing loneliness and despair anymore. He's accepted as the new Shaman King, and he's reunited with his mother and long-lost friend. The only real problem that I have with this scene is that Ohachio as a character really didn't need to exist. His role could have easily been filled by Masamune, and the way his character was built up isn't exactly the best either. You can't just randomly splice an image into a character's mind out of nowhere and say that justifies a plot point that's this major. Wait, what did he say? That is amazing. When I first read that, I seriously couldn't keep myself from giggling for the rest of the episode. It doesn't take away from this scene's impact completely. I still think that this is a good scene that works as an emotional climax, but come on. The scenes that follow of Yo and the rest of the guys in the future are alright. I don't really have the strongest attachment to the characters in the show aside from Ren and maybe Chocolove. The rest are either really one note or handled pretty sloppily in this version, and Yo, the one character who doesn't fall into those two categories, is written so inconsistently in terms of personality that it's hard for me to actually like him. I think the original anime also has the new one beat here. I love the characters from the original Shaman King. That's mostly because we actually got to know them. The America arc specifically feels like a road trip with a group of rowdy but close friends, and the chemistry between the group and the original is leagues above anything that the new version had. Some people might find it a little weird that the shaman fight doesn't have a conclusion and no one becomes the Shaman King, but that was never the most interesting part of the story to me. Without Hao, I doubt that it would have gone anywhere interesting, since he was such an amazing villain who was a big part of why the show was so fun and entertaining. But yeah, this final stretch of episodes was rough for the new Shaman King. The final episode was a good finale in my opinion, one that was largely successful in evoking satisfaction for me, but that final episode doesn't justify the wait time to get there. The build up to something is just as important as the follow through, and the new version fell short on the first half. Even in its best parts, the show was riddled with problems that I could see hindering it in the near future. On the other hand, the original show definitely had its faults, most of which I haven't really covered in this series of videos, and that's my biggest regret with this series focused on comparisons. But even at that show's dullest, the characters managed to make me care for them and invested in what was happening. The best way I can sum up the series is like this. When I think Shaman King, I'm definitely gonna think 2001 and not 2021.